It seems like whenever we look at a massive systemic catastrophe, like
Yeah.
a devastating economic crash or a war that just didn't need to happen.
Right, or even an entire ecosystem just being stripped bare.
Exactly. We have this really reflexive habit of pointing our fingers at one very specific culprit.
Oh, absolutely.
We look at the fallout and we say, well, there it is. That's the greedy politician or the greedy corporation or, the
Yeah.
greedy billionaire.
Yeah, it's always the greedy someone.
Always. And it is, without a doubt, one of the most emotionally charged words in the human language. Greed. Throughout history, it's basically served as our ultimate scapegoat.
It really has. It serves as the universal explanation for human failure, mostly because it is just incredibly convenient.
Convenient how?
Well, when you label a disaster as the result of greed, you're essentially boxing the problem up. You're placing the blame squarely on the moral failings of a few bad apples, I guess you could say.
Right.
And that gives society a pass on examining the larger picture. It's very comforting to believe that destruction only happens because a few uniquely evil people decided to be aggressively selfish today.
Right. It's a very neat and tidy narrative. But for today's deep dive, our mission is to completely dismantle that neat little box.
Which is going to be fun.
It is, because today we're looking at this fascinating stack of sources. We've got evolutionary neurobiology papers on the dopamine system, some behavioral economics research, and sociological essays on human development.
It's a really diverse stack.
It is. And we're using all of this to ask you, the listener, a radically different question. What if greed isn't a fixed personality trait belonging to a handful of quote-unquote evil people? What if instead it's an emergent behavior? Okay, let's unpack this. What if greed is less like a hardware defect that certain people are just biologically born with and more like a software bug?
I love that analogy.
Thanks. Like a glitch that inevitably happens when perfectly normal human psychology is forced to run on the wrong operating system, meaning our environment.
Yeah, that analogy is spot on. The architecture of greed actually makes a lot more sense when we look at it through three specific lenses: neuroscience, evolution, and cultural incentives.
Okay.
We really have to examine the brain's ancient survival wiring and then look at how our modern world essentially hijacks that wiring.
Right.
To truly understand this emergent behavior, we need to basically bypass morality for a moment and just look at the raw biological mechanisms at play.
So to understand this software bug we're experiencing today, we first have to take a long, hard look at the ancient hardware of the human brain.
Exactly.
And that means going back in time.
Way back. Hundreds of thousands of years back into our evolutionary history. Because to understand greed, you really have to understand the dopamine system.
Right, the famous dopamine system.
Exactly. And most people hear dopamine and they immediately associate it with pleasure. They think it's the chemical reward you get when you eat a piece of cake or win a video game.
Yeah, that's definitely how it gets talked about in pop psychology.
Right. But from a strictly neurological standpoint, the dopamine system is primarily the brain's anticipation and motivation circuitry.
Anticipation.
Yes, it fires aggressively, not just when you get a reward, but when you anticipate getting a reward. It's literally the chemical engine that pushes an organism to seek more.
Wow, okay. Because for our ancient ancestors, seeking more was literally the only way to stay alive, right?
Exactly.
Like if you were a prehistoric human who found a bush of berries and thought, I've had a few, I'm content, I'll just sit here under this tree.
You probably didn't survive the winter.
Right. You definitely didn't pass on your genes.
Right.
Because scarcity was the default state of nature.
Caloric scarcity, resource scarcity, security scarcity.
It was everywhere.
It was. So the ancestors who actually survived were the ones whose brains were highly sensitive to opportunity. Evolution rigorously shaped this dopamine system to constantly scan the horizon.
Always looking for the next thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was a mechanism designed to secure the next meal, the next secure shelter, the next boost in social status.
Status was a survival thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
In ancient tribal environments, belonging to a group and having high status within it meant you were protected.
Yeah.
You had priority access to resources.
Okay, that makes sense.
So the brain became hardwired to crave accumulation as a literal buffer against death. If you stopped accumulating, you died.
And that ancient survival-driven hardware is the exact same hardware sitting inside our skulls right now as we, drive to the office, check our phones, or look at our investment portfolios.
It's the exact same brain.
But the environment, the software we are running this hardware on is entirely different. The sources point out this massive evolutionary mismatch.
Yeah, it's a huge mismatch.
we've taken these ancient survival instincts, brought them into an era of unprecedented abundance, and just completely swapped out the objects of desire.
We really have. In modern civilization, the symbols of survival have been entirely abstracted.
Right.
Money now represents physical security. Status represents influence and power. And public recognition represents social belonging, safety in the tribe.
Wow.
So today, human success is largely measured by the accumulation of these abstract concepts. When someone relentlessly hoards wealth, their brain is actually doing exactly what it was designed to do over millennia.
Well, just responding to the cues.
Exactly. It is responding to environmental cues to ensure survival.
Hold on, though. I got to push back on this a little on behalf of anyone listening who's thinking this. That assumes everyone starts at the exact same baseline, which feels like a stretch.
How so?
What about the CEO who just seems fundamentally ruthlessly selfish by nature? Isn't there a genetic predisposition to hoarding all the resources? I mean, we see people in the exact same corporate environments where one is super collaborative and the other is just a total shark.
It's a fair question. But the behavioral economics and sociological essays in our source stack address this directly. They use the framework of the blank slate theory, combined with environmental shaping.
Okay.
No infant enters the world plotting a hostile corporate takeover.
I mean, I hope not.
Right. No baby is lying in a crib strategizing how to hoard all the toys to the detriment of their siblings. Human beings are actually born with the capacity for both deep compassion and ruthless competition.
Both are in there.
Exactly. Which one becomes dominant depends almost entirely on the incentive structures they're exposed to during their development and early socialization.
So it's less about a genetic destiny and more about the rules of the game they learn to play as they grow up. Like, if you take two children who are equally curious and capable of empathy, but you raise them in vastly different socioeconomic or cultural environments, their survival strategies will diverge completely.
Let's play that out. Place the first child in an environment where cooperation is consistently rewarded, where sharing resources yields praise, security, and reciprocal help when they need it.
Okay.
The dopamine system in that child learns to anticipate reward through collaboration.
Makes sense.
Now place the second child in an environment where survival depends on constant zero-sum competition. A world where if you don't grab the resource first, someone else takes it and you go hungry.
Yeah, a much harsher environment.
Right. The dopamine system in that second child learns to anticipate reward through aggressive accumulation and denying resources to others.
Because they have to. So the second child is going to learn to hoard, not because they possess some inherent evil, but because hoarding is the most logical, mathematically sound response to that specific environment.
Yeah.
It's a rational strategy for an irrational system.
That's exactly it. Greed is learned. It is shaped by cultural incentives, by the economic structures we are placed in, and by the examples set by those around us who hold power.
So the biology is the same, but the output is different.
Right. The neurobiology doesn't change, but the expression of it is entirely dependent on what the surrounding culture tells the brain is necessary for survival and status.
Okay, but if greed is just a learned survival tactic, that raises a scary question about ambition. At what exact point does a healthy, normal desire to pay next month's rent mutate into a pathological fear of never having enough?
That is the big question.
Because, we all want security. When does a reasonable amount of caution cross the line into endless destructive accumulation?
The threshold is crossed the moment self-interest transforms into total indifference toward others.
Indifference.
Yeah. And to understand the mechanics of how that shift actually happens, our sources dive deep into a psychological and biological concept known as hedonic adaptation.
Ah, hedonic adaptation. So with that, you're basically talking about the moving finish line.
Exactly.
You get a promotion, you are absolutely thrilled for a month, you feel like you finally made it. But then, almost inevitably, that new salary just becomes your new baseline.
It always does.
And suddenly, you're looking at the next rung on the corporate ladder, feeling inadequate all over again. Does the source material explain why our brains wipe out that satisfaction so quickly?
Yes, and what's fascinating here is that the rapid wiping out of satisfaction is a built-in survival feature, not a bug.
Wait, really?
Yeah, think about it. If our ancient ancestors caught a mammoth and felt permanently satisfied, they would starve 2 weeks later.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they just sit there.
Right. The human brain is remarkably, almost frustratingly, good at adapting to success. When you achieve something you've been working toward for years, you get a massive spike in dopamine.
The ultimate high.
But neurochemically, that spike cannot be sustained. The
Hmm.
receptors literally downregulate. Very quickly, that new state becomes your baseline. Yesterday's extraordinary achievement simply becomes today's normal.
Which means the drive for more is essentially a treadmill with no off switch.
Exactly.
Today's success becomes tomorrow's baseline expectation.
And greed really begins at the precise moment when more loses its actual utilitarian purpose. It's the disconnection point
Disconnection from what?
from need. It is where the accumulation of a resource completely disconnects from any genuine need or even basic pleasure. You aren't accumulating to survive anymore, and you aren't even accumulating to enjoy the wealth.
So what are you doing it for?
Possessing the thing simply becomes more important than actually contributing to the world or even enjoying the resource yourself. It becomes an abstract scoreboard.
It's just points on a board, and the source material highlights this with historical patterns that are just impossible to ignore once you see the mechanism at work.
Oh, everywhere you look.
Right. I mean, we see individuals who possess extraordinary, almost unfathomable wealth, yet they spend every waking hour seeking more, often at the immense expense of their own physical health, their families, and their peace of mind. We see historical leaders who already have immense history-shaping influence, yet they destroy their own legacies and empires by demanding absolute tyrannical control over neighboring territories they don't even need.
And we see the exact same behavioral pattern in the modern corporate world, too.
Definitely.
The research highlights organizations that have achieved remarkable, stable success. I mean, they have dominant market share. Yet, leadership will willingly sacrifice long-term consumer trust, or they'll actively degrade the quality of their own products just to squeeze out another tiny incremental bump in their quarterly profit margin.
Which is crazy. From a purely rational, long-term survival standpoint, degrading your own product makes no sense.
Not at all.
But because of that moving finish line of hedonic adaptation, the people running these systems will spend their entire lives chasing a horizon that continuously, inevitably moves away from them.
Because it's never about the object itself.
Right.
It's about the dopamine hit of the anticipation, the next hit of validation, the next acquisition, the next comparison to a rival. It's just an endless, exhausting chase.
It really is exhausting just thinking about it. And here's where it gets really interesting. Humanity has known about this endless chasing for thousands of years.
Oh, yeah.
We've recognized the destructive nature of unchecked accumulation, but for centuries, our primary method of trying to stop it has been religion and moral belief systems.
True.
We've stood at the pulpit and simply condemned greed as a sin. We've called it a moral failing. We've told people they need to repent for wanting more.
And the historical and sociological data strongly suggests that relying purely on moral condemnation to curb systemic behavior is, well, it's highly ineffective over the long term.
Because demanding moral perfection while forcing people to live inside an economic system that actively materially rewards ruthless accumulation makes absolutely no sense.
It's a total contradiction.
It is. Condemning greed without changing the underlying environment is like yelling at a houseplant for growing crooked when you're the one who placed the only light source in a weird, obscure corner of the room.
I love that.
Right. You can scream at the plant to grow straight all you want. You can give it moral sermons about the virtues of vertical growth. But biology is always going to follow the light.
Right, because condemning the plant completely ignores the architecture of the room it's trapped in.
Yes.
Demanding moral perfection from humanity fails because human beings are exquisitely sensitive to the material incentives around us.
The light in the room.
Exactly. The neurobiology demands that we follow the reward pathways. So if we want to change the behavior, we can't just divide humanity into good people and greedy people and cross our fingers hoping the good ones win the cultural war.
We actually have to redesign the room.
We get to redesign the room.
But what does it actually look like to do that? How do we build structural systems where honesty is fundamentally easier than deception, or where cooperation is mathematically more rewarding than exploitation?
Well, the behavioral economic sources provide several concrete frameworks for this systemic redesign.
Okay, lay them out for us.
It starts with shifting the metrics of success away from pure extraction. For example, in the corporate world, there's the concept of shifting from shareholder primacy.
Which is where the only legal obligation of a company is to maximize short-term financial returns for investors, right?
Exactly. Shifting from that to stakeholder value. This means restructuring corporate charters so that leadership is legally and financially incentivized to factor in the well-being of employees, the local community, and the environment.
Oh, okay.
We see this in the rise of B corporations, where the structural incentives literally demand a balance between profit and purpose.
So you are changing where the light source is in the room.
Precisely.
You're tying the executives' dopamine reward, their bonus, their status, their success, to the long-term health of the ecosystem, rather than just how much they can strip mine out of it this quarter.
Yes. And another macroeconomic example the sources explore is changing how nations actually measure their own success.
Like GDP.
Exactly. Currently, the global standard is gross domestic product, or GDP. But GDP measures all economic activity, regardless of whether that activity is helpful or harmful.
Wait, really? So bad things can boost GDP?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm.
An oil spill actually increases GDP because of all the money spent to clean it up.
That is wild.
An arms race increases GDP. So redesigning the system means adopting alternative metrics, like the genuine progress indicator.
The GPI.
Right. The GPI deducts the environmental and social costs of economic activity, or using models of circular economies where waste is penalized rather than subsidized.
I see.
When you change the macro metric of success, the micro behaviors of the individuals within that system naturally adapt.
Biology follows the light.
Exactly. True, lasting progress depends on creating environments where success is measured by what a person contributes to the ecosystem rather than just what they manage to extract from it.
So, what does this all mean for you listening right now? If we were to successfully redesign our environments, our workplaces, our communities, our national metrics, to measure success by contribution rather than extraction, what does a society free from the grip of endless accumulation actually look like? What is the actual opposite of greed?
Well, most people intuitively assume the opposite of greed is extreme asceticism.
Yeah.
The monk lifestyle.
Oh, right, where you give up all your material possessions, take a vow of poverty, and go live in a cave.
Exactly. But that is really just another form of moral purity testing that completely ignores human nature.
Right. It's fighting the biology again.
Yes. The source material argues something much more profound. The opposite of greed isn't poverty. The opposite of greed is the psychological and cultural concept of enough.
Enough. It sounds almost radical when you say it out loud in today's culture, but we have to clarify what enough means in this context, because it doesn't mean stagnation, right?
No, not at all. Having enough does not mean you stop growing. It doesn't mean you abandon ambition or stop creating or stop dreaming of a better future.
Okay, good.
It just means recognizing that a truly meaningful life cannot be measured solely by the volume of resources we possess. It is shifting the biological reward center away from distance and toward depth.
Depth over distance. I like that.
Yeah, recognizing that life is ultimately measured by what we create, by what we seek to understand, and by the stability we leave behind for the people who come after us.
It's shifting the goal from accumulating resources to accumulating meaning.
Exactly.
And this doesn't just apply to individual psychology, does it? I mean, this scales up directly to how entire civilizations survive or fail.
It absolutely scales. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we arrive at what is arguably the most powerful takeaway from our behavioral and historical sources today.
Lay it on us.
We have to ask, what is the true wealth of a civilization? If it isn't GDP and it isn't endless resource extraction, what is it? The greatest wealth a civilization can accumulate is not money.
Which feels totally counterintuitive at first glance because, I mean, money is exactly what builds the skyscrapers, the highways, and all the infrastructure.
It is. Money builds buildings. Power commands obedience from the populace. Technological advancement transforms industries and cures diseases. All of those things are incredibly vital tools.
Right.
But the true wealth, the actual stabilizing force of any society is trust.
Trust.
Without trust, transaction costs skyrocket, institutions freeze. Every single civilization, no matter how rich or technologically advanced, slowly begins to fracture from within when trust evaporates.
Because when the environment overwhelmingly rewards ruthless extraction, neighbors literally cannot trust neighbors.
Exactly.
Consumers cannot trust producers because they know the producer is incentivized to degrade the product for a wider margin. Citizens cannot trust their institutions because they know the institutions are captured by the highest bidder.
The entire architecture collapses under the weight of its own paranoia. Trust is the only metric of wealth that actually stabilizes a complex society over the long term. Endless accumulation by a few, always, inevitably, degrades the trust of the many.
It's a mathematical certainty.
It is. And once that trust is gone, All the money and technology in the world cannot stitch the social fabric back together. The software bugs simply overwhelm the operating system.
Man, this has been such a paradigm-shifting way to look at something we encounter every single day in the news, in our workplaces, and honestly, in
It
ourselves.
really reframes everything.
We are so quick to judge the crooked plant, and so remarkably slow to examine the lighting in the room.
So true.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to turn this directly to you, the listener. I want you to reflect on your own relationship with accumulation, because regardless of our background, we all run on this exact same evolutionary hardware.
Every single one of us.
Think about a time in your life when you were absolutely convinced that more was the definitive answer. Maybe it was a specific salary number you wrote down in your 20s, a bigger house in a certain neighborhood, a certain number of followers on a platform, or, a prestigious title at work.
Mm-hmm.
You finally reached it, and when did it ultimately fail to satisfy you? When did you realize the finish line had just moved again and your baseline had just reset?
It's a deeply personal question, but it leads to an even more profound, almost haunting question that our sociological texts leave us with.
Yeah.
Look around at our modern world.
Mhm.
If even absolute abundance access to more calories, more data, more entertainment, and more physical comfort than our ancient ancestors could possibly fathom in their wildest dreams,
Right. Unprecedented abundance.
if that still leaves so many people feeling that they fundamentally never have enough, what are we truly trying to fill? If the hunger you are feeding can never mathematically be satisfied by money or status, what is your brain actually hungry for?
It really makes you wonder, if our ancient dopamine circuitry is fundamentally unalterably wired to anticipate more, maybe the solution isn't to try and meditate the dopamine system away or somehow shut it down.
Which is impossible anyway.
Right. What if you actively rewired your environment to anticipate depth instead of distance? What if, instead of chasing the next physical milestone or the next purchase that's miles away on that continuously moving horizon, you trained your brain's reward system to fire for the deepening of what you already have?
That's a beautiful way to frame it.
The deepening of a single complex relationship. The quiet, unseen mastery of a single skill that you pursue purely for the joy of understanding it. Could we hack our own evolutionary hardware to make the realization of enough feel like the ultimate victory?
I think we have to try.
Maybe the real cure for the software bug of greed isn't constantly trying to rewrite the foundational code of human nature. Maybe it's just realizing we don't need a new operating system when the one we have, right here and now, is capable of producing extraordinary things as long as we make sure we're growing toward the right kind of light.